This is another justice of the Supreme Court for place 4. Oh, Lord. This one's a crazy one. This one is between John Devine and Kristen Veen Weems. And we're not going to talk about Christine at all, because we're just going to talk about John Devine. Because John Devine, remember, is a justice of the Supreme Court, a justice of the Texas Supreme Court. Bear that in mind, the importance of impartiality when it comes to ruling in cases that see the Supreme Court. Bear that in mind as we read through some of this history for John Devine. He won his GOP primary this year for this seat by 0.8 of a percentage point. That's by about 16,000 votes. For a Texas statewide election, it was super close because Republicans don't like John Devine. Republicans are real worried that he's going to lose this. Justifiably so, because he's insane. He called the idea of church-state separation a myth. He fought to have the Ten Commandments displayed in his Harris County District courtroom. He claimed that he was arrested 37 times in the 80s at anti-abortion protests. This is a man who regularly sees cases in the Supreme Court on abortion rights in Texas. Was arrested 37 times at anti-abortion protests. Called the fellow justices of the Supreme Court of Texas brainwashed. This is an all-Republican Supreme Court, by the way. Brainwashed, and that they cared more about abiding by legal processes. They care about that too much. They cared more about abiding by legal processes than their fidelity to the Constitution. I, for one, would prefer for my Supreme Court justices to care about abiding by legal processes. He claimed that the state's all-GOP Court of Criminal Appeals, remember it's the Supreme Court and the Court of Criminal Appeals, he claimed that all of the judges on the Court of Criminal Appeals were controlled by rhinos and were trans Republicans. Cool. He also, and this is insane, refused to recuse himself from a sex abuse lawsuit against former SBC leader. We have some familiarity with the SBC. Again, a lawsuit against former SBC leader Paul Pressler and his law partner Jerry Woodfill. Devine worked at Woodfill and Pressler's law firm. Remember, this is a case seeing the Supreme Court. 2 other justices recused themselves in this case. Devine refused to. Worked at the law firm of the people being sued, prosecuted. Worked at Woodfill and Pressler's firm years before taking the bench. His tenure at the firm overlapped with the time that the plaintiff, a former employee of the firm, was allegedly molested by Pressler. Devine worked at the law firm at the same time that the victim worked at the law firm and was being sexually abused, molested by Paul Pressler. 2 other justices who previously worked for the law firm recused themselves. Devine did not, and instead dissented from the court's 5-2 decision that allowed the suit to go forward after a challenge to its statute of limitations. Paul Pressler is dead, thankfully, hopefully rotting in the bad place. Paul Pressler was a serial abuser of young men who worked for his law firm. The victim in this case, along with 7 other victims in this case, alongside 7 other victims who were abused by Pressler in this case. The specific victim that started this case, the suit against Pressler, was molested by Pressler, was sexually abused by Pressler for 25 years, starting when he was 14 years old. The last instance of sexual abuse happened just outside of the statute of limitations. And the prosecutors in the case argued that because this abuse started when the victim was so young, he couldn't rationalize the idea that he was being abused properly, and therefore some grace should be extended for the statute of limitations, especially since Paul Pressler was being accused of molesting young boys for decades, molesting dozens of young boys for decades. The prosecutors argued that maybe some grace should be extended for the statute of limitations. John Devine, having worked for Pressler, been a good friend of Pressler's for his office, having used Pressler to further his career, did not recuse himself from the case where Pressler is being sued, and was one of the only 2 Supreme Court justices to dissent from the case. John Devine said, actually, no, statute of limitations should be upheld in this case. This man should not be able to prosecute Paul Pressler. Add that on top of, I don't understand how this person can possibly claim any level of impartiality in judicial decisions whenever he calls church-state separation a myth, calls fellow Republicans on the Supreme Court rhinos and trans Republicans, and claims to have been arrested 37 times at anti-abortion protests. I don't understand how he can be a Supreme Court justice. So his race is very contested. It is very possible that Christine Weems could be the only Democratic person on the Supreme Court out of the whole Supreme Court and Court of Criminal Appeals if he loses this race, which is very possible. So I highly recommend that people go vote for Christine Weems. She seems cool.